we do not, we typically do not use the metrics, or even if we use the metrics, those metrics are not the right metrics. Uh, in short, I can say that we are lazy about metrics in most of the places I've worked. And people, for some reason, I don't know why they don't take metrics seriously. It's pretty standard what comes with it, in Jira, like burn down chart and then velocity chart and all those things. But besides that, the people do not invest time on metrics. And the reason I'm saying is like there's some quotes on the matrix. You can look at that, which I've collected. And this is actually a book, the first one, Measure What Matters. And this is a very good book. If you've not read, you should read it. And this is basically, if you've heard of the OKRs, you know, objective and key results, that's what is coming from this particular book. So, and I'm not referring to the book, I'm just talking about the wordings itself. Measure what matters. So if you do not measure, then what happens? What you can measure, you can improve. If if you want to improve something, you have to measure it. If you do not measure, you do not know where you started, where you're going. Kind of one of the things, if you attended my previous sessions, the one thing which I harp on a lot, and that is being called goal orientation. So if you do not set up a goal, then the chances of your improvement would be less. The reason for that is you will be going in all directions. If you go in all directions, then you cannot measure, you cannot make a definite progress. And I keep giving an example of, if you're digging a hole, 10 feet deep hole, and you go and dig 10 1 feet hole in different places, you will not achieve your objective. If you want to get water, and if you're digging a well, you're not going to get water, right? Why? Because you're digging in 10 different places. So it's very important that if you want to improve in agile workspace, we talk about the continuous improvement. Okay, so if we talk about the continuous improvement and we do not measure, we just cannot improve. We think we are improving, but we don't know. So one accurate measurement is worth 1,000 opinions. People might have opinions, and a lot of people, if you go and ask them, like how your team is doing, the people will say like, hey, we started as like the scale of 1 to 10, 1, and now we are 2, now we are 5, or something like that. But if you ask them what data do you have to support that, they won't have any data. So if you do not have data, then it's very hard to validate that your team has really improved, right? And another quote from Einstein, that everything that can be counted does not necessarily count. And everything that counts cannot necessarily be counted. So this is the key. This is actually the key in agility. A lot of measurements we have because it's easily available. You have Sonar Cube, you have other tools which can automatically go and see the unit test. So you can go and see like, okay, this is my unit test, or you can go and see your test coverage, or something that you can see or you can find easily, you measure that. Something that is difficult, you ignore that. But that's what it actually says. This Einstein quote is the pretty interesting, that everything that can be counted does not necessarily count. I mean, I'm not saying that code coverage is not important, it's very important. But what I'm saying is, a lot of the things in the agile world that we really want to know, is actually very hard to get. It's not easy to get. And that's why it's often ignored, because people don't have time for that, they do not put effort on that. And and the last thing is, customer is never satisfied. Their dissatisfaction is the source of innovation. If we want to put customer first, we must know what matters to them, what improves customer satisfaction, and how can we meet their need by all means, right? So again, we have to measure that. Like, we need to understand, either through CSAT, through NPS, Net Promoter Score, through some survey. We have to understand their sentiment. We have to get connected to them. I'm saying customer, it means customer or user, anybody who uses your product. You must be in touch with them. You must understand them. You should know them. I remember uh, I was kind of training in Starbucks to the internal employees. So one of the person asked me like, how would you know that whatever you're training people are liking it? So we did a survey monkey, and we try to collect what is called the NPS, Net Promoter Score, based on those. And we set a criteria that any trainer who gets less than 40 means they need to improve, they need to do something. So now the trainer has a goal, like once they go and train people even within the company, inside the company, then the people must approve their training, whoever they are. They may not be knowing much about agility and all, but at least you have a measurement. So if you start getting like 47 and up to 70, it's very good, right? And if people were getting the score of like 40 or less, 40 was pretty good, but less like 15, 20, 30, then we know that something is not good. People are not liking it. So those kind of measurement in all walks of life is very important, so that you know where you are and how you can improve. Uh, this is basically about the agenda of this webinar, but I'll go quickly over to the next part. So typically in Agile, we talk about three different kind of metrics that matters. And the first is the quality metrics. And I'll give you some new spin on that today, like what could be the quality metrics and how we actually do it. The second is efficiency and effectiveness. Mostly it's about what are the things, a lot of things we do, but what are the new things that we can do? I will talk about it. And the team health metrics. And this is going to be not easy. This is one of the most difficult part, team health. Sutherland and kind of people, they suggest happiness metrics. We also try that, but it's very hard to gauge somebody happiness. It becomes very artificial. But anyway, we'll talk in little detail about those metrics. Let's go one by one. The first is the product quality metrics. So quality, how do you know that whatever you have created is of high quality? And quality comes from all sides. The quality is also, it's not just you have an automation and code coverage, and that's quality. The quality is also perceived, should also be perceived as a quality product. So the first point which I talk about is the failed deployments. This is not about like you're trying to deploy something in the production and fail. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like when you deploy something in production and you give it to the users, users either do not use it, they do not like it, or they cannot use it for whatever reason. It doesn't come in their way. And this I have seen in my previous company where I was working. What I saw is a lot of people, they will go and deploy something. And actually, I used to run their entire the executive status meeting, where they will try to understand like what is the progress, what is happening every 2 weeks. And one thing I found pretty interesting, like something we talked about last week or 2 weeks back, I took a note of that and suddenly that disappeared. Nobody is talking about it. And then I asked the question, then everybody is silent. So I dig into that and try to find out like why people are not talking about something that they were talking about so feverishly 4 weeks back or 6 weeks back or 2 weeks back. And then I realized what happened was whatever they tried, it failed. It didn't work. So people try to hide it and they didn't want to share with anyone. So it became very non-transparent kind of an atmosphere where you try to work on something, you try to get a result, you have a hypothesis, and you're not sharing the results. Only thing that you're sharing is the positive results that it worked. If you have that kind of a attitude, then most likely you won't improve, because all the bad things you're going to hide, the good things you're going to share, and that's not the right data for overall improvement of the company. So the first thing I did there was, and we'll talk about in more detail in the next slide, but I turned the entire reporting. I got rid of those red, green, and yellow statuses. No more red, green, yellow statuses. everybody is going to go and talk in terms of the outcome. Like in every iteration, what was the hypothesis means what was the goal in the sprint goal, and what was the hypothesis, what we are working on, how much OKR they had the OKR model, or you can have KPI, or you can have something. What was that you're trying to move, you're trying to impact? And for example, if they want to increase the revenue by 4%, so I know that in one iteration you cannot increase the revenue by 4%. So say that my hypothesis is like I'm going to go and increase my revenue by 0.5% based on this one, or maybe 0.1%, whatever your hypothesis is. And then you go and see whether the thing that you deployed is actually making any movement in the positive or negative direction. If not, then try more, and keep trying until you have the data, enough data to say whether this, whatever you're trying, your product is working or not working. And you will get a pretty good idea in a very short period of time whether you are getting. So what they started doing, they were not just discussing the outcome. Many times it was lagging, like you cannot see the results in like a month or 2 months. So they will come, or I'll ask them, I'll keep a note of it, that they have to come back and share the data, like after 1 month, after 2 months, after 3 months, whatever the period of time. Was there any movement in the OKR? If not, then we would question is like, should we keep investing in that particular initiative, in that particular project or not, or we should go and start working on something. And we had some very interesting observation in that. And after that, the things became so transparent that the people started accepting, yes, it works, it doesn't work. And that's where we started sharing that metrics, the number of failed deployments and number of pivots. Pivots means like we change the direction midway without completing the project. Or if we have to keep investing, then fine, it's not pivoting. So that's in my opinion is one of the most important metrics that we all must use. How we can go and measure the real outcomes, then this is called something like business value, or the value driven development. Means like you are chasing value, a definite value. And now when you are chasing value, then you know exactly what's your priority is. And when you know your priority, then you measure it and you go and make an improvement in that direction.
Just want to add, maybe a question as well is that I think it will be important to define, first of all, define the outcome itself, what exactly you're chasing for, and then maybe defining metrics around them, that outcome as well, to make sure that people understand if that metric is making a positive movement or the negative movement. And based on that, I think you will be able to understand whether the deployment was failed or was successful.
Yep, absolutely. And like I said, you can also keep track of number of failed deployment in terms of deployment in production failed. But that's I don't think that's very useful, because if it's failed, then you're going to go and work hard and make it. That's more like an internal thing. People also keep track of that, like they have a release date, and how many times when they go for the release failed, something like that. But the reason I'm not using it, you can ask that question later, that why I did not recommend that later in our question and answer session. But typically I do not recommend that. The second is the release NPS, and the release NPS is, now your deployment is there, right? And you have to get data. Like, is it working? Is it not working? People are liking it, not liking it. I remember we had a dashboard functionality, and we released something to the dashboard, assuming that this will reduce the number of the calls to the call center. So we had certain hypotheses, like if we introduce this features, and the people are mostly, they talk about those features over the phone, like, hey, I'm not able to see my account information, I'm not able to see this, whatever they have. The number one call drivers. Then if you put those functionality in the dashboard, the people will start making less calls. And we implemented those, and what we saw was a little bit less reduction in the call. So you'll be surprised to know like why people are still calling when the information is there. And that's where actually you go, and when you do this kind of a survey, the NPS, Net Promoter Score, like did they really understand the feature? Did they like the feature? You ask certain questions and you'll get an idea whether the problem was really there or that was just our assumption that putting those features is actually going to solve the problem. So you have to be connected to the people, both as kind of as a means of educating them, keeping them engaged, as well as at the same time solving their problem by listening to them, right? So listening to your customer is super important, and that's where this release NPS, and not like every small release, but when you have like some kind of a good release, good feature that you release, or find out a way that how you can engage and try to get more data on that so that you always stay connected to the users. Third, of course, that you know very well is a skip defects, like how many defects that we could not catch and actually caught by the customers, not like we caught in the production. Actually, we can also include that, but typically the defects are the defects. My definition of defect, the defects are the defects which comes in the way of customer. If the customer does not care, take example Facebook, take example any application. Do you think they don't have defects? They have tons of defects, thousands of defects. I'm pretty sure maybe tens and thousands of defects, but probably you won't care because it's not coming in your way, right? So in the software, when you have defects and the defect is not noticed in the sense like it's not coming in your way, then that's actually not a defect. The defect is a defect when it's coming in the way of the customer. That's stopping customer from fulfilling their goals. And that's what the defect is. So skip defects, especially the defects which was reported by customer, is very important. So this is on the release side, like how you can connect with the customers, with your users, to go and get some idea like how the quality is, and that should basically drive your you know that what you are working on, why you're working on, and what's the quality of that. It basically covers these three things. And I'm not saying just there are only three things, there's so many other things, but you have these three things especially, that helps a lot. On the internal side, on the code side, I have some pretty interesting observations here as well. What I've seen is when people write the code, it's like they're gentlemen coders. Uh, they go, they review the code, they give the comment, and sometimes they say like, "Yeah, it's good enough. Let's go and," or there is a date pressure or some kind of, the sprint is ending. Just go and let it pass, and we will tackle it later. So we have that kind of a mentality. So this is the mentality. Then what happens is not all our codes are, I would say, optimal. We see that it's working and just push it. So that's where somewhere I read about that code NPS means like when you are creating a code and especially when you're approving a code, some lead or some senior person who is approving the code, they need to rate it. And this is something not used widely, and I have only seen in a couple of places where that lead developer or the person, they can give a rating that is it like a red, green, or amber, means it's something that needs, I'm approving it, but this is not a very good example of how we should write the code. How I mean, it may not have enough coverage. It may not have the best functionality, whatever the reason. Looks like there is noise behind. Yeah. So can you please mute?
Yeah, let me just mute. Uh, you continue, please.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm recommending here is do something like, especially that person who is approving the code to merge in any branch, right? The develop, master, or whatever in the production. Make sure that you rate that code like, is it like red, green, or green is like an excellent code and something. And what I mean by NPS is like, uh, give some numbers or some color coding so that it means if you have written this kind of a code, then I'm going to go and promote and give an example like, hey, that's the kind of code that you need to write all the time. That's the kind of code you would like to promote across. This is something. And we need to have those data at the end of the day. And I'm pretty sure there were some plugins available, and especially where I've seen the developer that was using it, they had some plugins where they can easily go and see like what percentage of code that was approved fall into the category of green, red, or amber. You know, like 30% was green, 30% was amber, and rest 40% was red. And why it's important is for two reasons. Number one, you know the overall code quality yourself without anybody looking into it. And second, which is the next line, refactoring. This is one thing which I've seen, which is done in some places. I've seen people do a lot, and some places people do not do at all. Refactoring is one of those fundamentals of agility. If you're really doing an agile way, working or coding an agile way, the what we call the agile way means you try something and then try to keep building. You try a very simple system you create first and then keep building on it. That required a huge amount of refactoring. And keep in mind, it's just like a 2-week iterations. When you have those 2-week iterations, there's a high possibility that you may carry some technical debts. And do not keep compiling those technical debts, otherwise you will be in the debt trap. So the best thing is to keep reducing those debt as you go. And it should be the part of this. And that must be counted. You must have, there are a lot of tools available as well, but that must be counted, like how much debt you have reduced. You should have statistics on that. Like, hey, we have accumulated this amount of debt and this is the debt. So there are tools available, or you can do it manually, or you do it through stories or some other means. But like I said, it must be very apparent. It should not be like, hey, we have a technical debt, it's hidden. The whole idea is making those transparent. And this is a very important part of it. I see there are a lot of comments there in this thing. Shrikant, is there something important that people want to know now, or they can wait until the end?
Yeah, actually, let me just, actually I'm browsing some of the comments. So let's address them right now itself. So one of the comment is about a question actually. In case of the failed deployment, if we are not able to achieve the goal, how do we manage the end customer sentiments on failed attempts? How do we ensure we do not lose their trust?
Yeah. So when you have the failed, like I said, I talked about 2 points there. One is that release NPS, and other is with the failed. Failed in the sense, like, I'm not talking about like technically failed. I'm talking about you release something, and then people either didn't like it, or people did not use it, or people thought like, well, that's not actually I was looking for, you know. And like I gave the example of reducing the calls in the call center, even though we thought that we gave whatever they wanted, because most of the time the customer is going to go and call about that. So through dashboard, we gave exactly the same thing, but turned out that the customer were looking for not just that, some other number as well, and some other place as well. So you have to really understand the customer sentiments, how they work. And it's not about one customer, a set of customers, the people who are actually using it. And for that, I talked about that release NPS, that you have to stay connected somehow. You have to have either the feedback mechanism on those particular features, or some kind of a survey that you have to do, like I said, release NPS, or some other means. You have to collect data. You have to be talking to the customer all the time so that you understand what is their key pain point, and then you can go and focus, okay, now I can go and solve their problem. If you don't, then you will be assuming that you're solving the customer pain point, and the customer will say like, doesn't matter to me. So it's the only way you can solve is by staying close to them and staying connected. Yeah. Good. Any other question?
Yeah. So another one is, and before that, I think Shilpi, I hope this answer satisfied whatever you are asking actually. Um,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ashok. Thanks, Shrikant.
Okay, so the next one is, I think this is, I mean, a couple of times asked actually. So this is about like what metrics we need to do during the release and every sprint. So my take, I mean, what I was just explaining in the comments is that whatever metrics Ashok is talking about is, then they are divided into different categories, but they have to be taken into account in each sprint and release actually. So, but then you can further elaborate on that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So that question, save it for the end, and I'll tell you how to handle that and what we need to do every iteration.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
what I'm recommending here, there are two other categories left. This is just one category we had talked about, and what is the frequency, when you should use it, and how to use it. This is very important because keep in mind, this is not going to be simple. This is going to be time taking. You have to invest quite a bit of time in creating the right metrics. And just like any other thing in agility, in agile, you have to keep thinking about metrics, that is it the right metrics that we're collecting? Is it solving our problem? Is it solving our pain points? If not, then keep coming to the board and keep changing your metrics. Keep including, keep excluding those kind of metrics. So that is very important. We'll talk about later about that, like how we actually do it. Next is the productivity metrics. And one thing that you have heard about a lot is cycle time. So what people do is whatever the software, they get it, whatever feature epic they get it, and they say like when it is started, and they have some kind of a Kanban board, and they can see like it started here, or they can see those data stamp when it was created and then when it was released to production. People do it, but honestly, that is meaningless. You can have some idea about like one day we try to collect the cycle time on all the features when I was in Starbucks, and you turn out like everything has a more or less a month long time frame for release to production. And the reason for that was when the idea came, it came to the backlog or it started. Can somebody mute the phone, please? Yeah. So when it started somewhere, you know, the inception or somewhere that the idea originated. From there, it came to the iteration that took some time, and then there's a deployment time and all those things. So average, it was between a month and a half. It actually doesn't tell you anything. Like everything takes a month and a half, even if it takes 2 months. If that's your cycle time, it becomes kind of a useless data. So the key thing here is finding out the delivery that counts. Like if you have a feature and then when you delivered and you realize the value of that delivery, right? Realize the value means it reached the customer from the start to the finish. You have to make sure that it's a valuable delivery, not just anything. Like do not just count for all the features. And next question is going to say is like, why would you do the features if that doesn't count? Exactly. So that's exactly what it means. So that goes back to writing your features in such a way that that really matters. And so that's the importance of this metrics. It will start fixing a lot of the things which otherwise will not be attended. So always keep looking for that. Hey, we delivered this thing, but we just delivered and there was no value into that. So when you're measuring the cycle time, the the formula still remains the same. The start time, finish time minus start time by features, like how many features that you how you delivered. But basically, keep in mind, always keep the value means is it valuable to the customer or not? Not on anything that you do. Like if you have to do some kind of an upgrade, and if you have to do some kind of a lot of people create a feature for refactoring or something like that. That hardly matters because that's important indirectly. That helps customer, and especially if you're creating technical stories, it doesn't matter because the technical stories are technical stories, and you can just see like, hey, I deliver. That's more like a task management. The whole idea behind the cycle time is chasing the value. Like how long does it take to deliver a value, and can we improve that delivering the value? So it's not just about the cycle time, but can we reduce that cycle time? So this is about the reduction for a delivery. Means this is the cycle time it took for example, when we measured as well, everything was a month and a half. There was no discussion that can we reduce that. Can we reduce that month to 2 weeks? Can we reduce that 2 weeks to 1 week? That's the kind of a discussion you should have, and that's why it's important that we present a matrix which talks about reduction in cycle time, not just like, hey, take any features and just put it over there in the production. That doesn't matter. How this is actually delivering a value and how we can reduce that value delivery over the period of time. This kind of a matrix is really going to help us. The second is, and this is about one of the things I always keep talking about is system. We should always try to go and deliver something, some kind of a metrics in terms of system. What I mean to say system is like most of the metrics that you see, like velocity, burn down chart, or whatever that is very much confined to a team, right? Because it's easy to collect. But this metrics, when you're talking about the system, like how you're improving quality across, that includes a lot of things. For example, a quality delivery would be how well you're writing your features, how well you're writing your stories. Are does do your stories have all those hooks to collect data? Is it written in a quality way? Do the people understand the story? Is it handoff, or the people are working collaboratively? When you work on the story, are you having all those best, definition of done's, all the things that you're doing? Do you have the definition of ready, definition of done? Is it well tested or tested first? There are a lot of things that you do which ultimately is going to ensure like, oh, now it's a quality product. Those things cannot be measured by just one single thing like code coverage or the velocity or anything, right? For that, you need to have some mechanism of collecting those data. Like for me, quality means this is the goal. My goal is to have the highest possible quality. For this, these are the questions that I have to answer. Did we have definition of ready for all the stories? Did we have a nice, well-crafted features, means features meeting some standards, which is approved by the uh, developers, or there was no handoff? We are working together. Was there enough collaboration on all the stories? Some kind of a data we will have to collect all through. So, and those data will depend on the question that we ask ourselves as a team. Like, and once we have data for each of the questions, then we can see like, hey, this is our overall score, and next time when we go and try to improve quality, the quality score should be higher. In order for the quality score to be higher, we need to have these questions answered, or maybe there's some questions are missing. Come back to the drawing board and add more questions, and then keep trying to improve your overall quality index. So that's what there is a useful tool that I like it. I use it. It's not that popular. Goal quality metrics, and I'll show an example of that in the end of the slide. So we can use those kind of a thing. The good thing with this metrics is it does not talk about one area. It talks about the whole system, that each impacting part of the system, and how we can still think about the delivery of quality. Delivery of quality is not just dev, keep in mind. A lot of people think like the quality means testers. No, quality means everybody who is engaged in that process. Then how are you going to measure that? So this is one of the techniques, and I'm pretty sure there are other techniques as well, which we can use, where it will talk about the overall systemic impact on the quality, not just a siloed impact like the tester did the testing or not on the particular feature. Third
Uh,
is outcome. Yeah.
I think there are some, I mean, some questions from the people. So, Dhanya, you raised your hand. So, any questions from your side?
I have a question. Like last year, we ran into a project wherein we had to get the requirements from the client. All right, and there was a contract that if we complete this project by June, and we would get some amount of money for the parent company. So in this case, we had, even the requirements was delayed from the client end because they had so many, management changes and other stuff. But we had to deliver by June, and the agreement, the contract, and negotiation, which just pulled out, and we were able to deliver it by October, right? So in this case, how this, like, now we have completed the phase one, how can we improve in this phase two, wherein still we are waiting for the requirements from the client. And this particular feature what we are developing, it is dependent on other feature which is already developed, and that is already handled by the client. So yeah, hope
So,
I'm
so you,
clear on this.
so what is your question here? Like, how should we report that, or how, what metrics you need?
No, in this case, we are actually waiting from the client, and the same thing is getting repeated in the phase two, even after we are approaching client, or for the early requirements, wherein we know the planning is not happening correctly. We are knowing that we are not entering the sprint planning with a definition of ready. We are not
Yes.
able to exit. So in that case, phase two, in these kind of very thin line of communication between the client and the parent, like how can we improve, it comes in the matter of business. We just cannot
Okay, got
blame
it,
with the
got it,
client.
got it. Yep, yep. So what you're suggesting basically is like you have this kind of a matrix which talks about like it was not ready, it was maybe a very low score on the definition of ready index, something like that. That is going to help. That's what
Correct,
you're saying, right? Yep, yep.
correct, correct,
Totally
correct.
agree. Absolutely. And another thing I will add on your example is, uh, especially if you want to go agile way, and this is very important. Always, when you have the date-driven delivery, always break it down into smaller goals. Smaller goals means, for example, uh, this is November today, and they say like you have to deliver something by next November, 2022, right? Or say June next year. You have like 6, 8 months left to deliver something. If you really want to become agile in that way and you have to meet the date, the first thing that you should do is to work on what we can deliver in the first month, what we can deliver in the second month, what we can deliver in the third month, fourth month, go month by month. Or if, going lower than that, iteration by iteration would be even harder. So at least go with a month, and then try to go and collect and report on the metrics that how you're doing every month. So if you want to achieve something, ask them to do some pre-work, break it down into monthly goals, and then you start reporting on the monthly goals. And then your metrics is going to be reported early, not at the end of the project. So if you start reporting those metrics early, hey, your requirements were not meeting the standard, your definition of done, whatever we are doing was not meeting the standards, we were not having enough coverage, we have got so many defects, all the things that you want to measure. And like I said, the systemic impact that you need to capture, that you will start exposing way early, like in the very first month. And they will have excuses like, hey, we started in the beginning of this. That's fine, that's fine. But you can show that by with metrics, how can you improve that low quality index to higher quality index by answering certain questions and giving them specific data. So that's the beauty of it. And that's the kind of thing we should always promote together. Like, hey, we are talking not just about how many defects we got by testers, we are talking holistically about this. Okay, cool. Any other
Sure,
question?
sure. Yes, thank you,
Thank you.
thank you. No, for now from my end.
There is another one actually from Manish Ole. So, Manish, you want to ask a question?
So, hey, Ashok, hey, Shrikant. So, Ashok, you were talking about requirements and kind of purity of requirement. I believe, based on my little experience, I believe this is the kind of a very $1 million question, that how we can uh, make good requirements which can be translated from user version to Scrum teams or Agile teams version, so that they can work on it. Do you
Oh,
have
yeah.
any suggestion in
Oh,
terms?
yeah, 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 absolutely. And it's $1 million question, so you'll have to give me $1 million. before
Yeah,
I ask.
definitely. You already deserve it, Ashok. So do let me know how, where and how I can make delivery.
Yes. So that so that itself is a huge what you call. There is
Yeah.
it's a very I think I do that impact mapping workshop? No.
I think you did that one, a
Yes.
small one.
First of all, a few rules. So
Mhm.
I can share that those decks, or we can talk about that, or I can spend more time with you one on one, and I can explain you again, take you through the whole deck. The key thing that is most important here is never develop whatever you call the requirement. I don't like the word requirement. I like the stories, epics, whatever you call it.
Stories or a picture.
Needs
Yep.
in silo. The more you develop in silo, you can develop to certain extent in silo. For example, when you're collecting your ideas and you want to go, the moment you are ready for the development, means you want to take it to the developers, start working together, start developing the ideas together, start doing the impact mapping, story mapping, or any mapping that you want to do. Start doing as early as possible. So the moment I say like, yeah, I'm thinking of 10 ideas today, this idea is good, I want to work on. The moment you're thinking of engaging other people, do not engage in silo. Like the business should not just be talking to the business themselves and creating stories and
Hmm.
epics. Do
Okay.
not do that.
Okay.
Big no no. The moment you do that, you have started creating the quality problem right there. You start engaging your product owners, you start engaging your tech leads, or especially those few people in the tech, your architects, or whoever that person is, and always work to, and start engaging your coach. Most important, like Manish, start
Hmm.
engaging Manish there, and then you start working and start creating those kind of a story maps or the impact mapping, and that's where you have to go and start defining, like how, not just, there's a lot of things that you have to define. Number one, that how you're going to go and actually find out the minimum, the thinnest possible slice, the vertical slice, that MVP, the thinnest, how you can create the simplest possible system, and how you can create a system architecture at that level, high level, very high level,
Got
not
it.
low level. All those things must happen together way early. If it doesn't happen, then you know what is going to happen. Somebody thought of doing something, they will hand it off to somebody, they will understand something. Every time there is a handoff, you're losing at least 15% of your intent. And in 3 or 4 handoffs, you virtually lose like 80% of the intent. And then you're done. What you get is like nowhere close. So that's one of those secrets.
Sure. So
Should
what
be, yeah.
I do have one question related to it in terms of when as you're talking about metrics. So in terms of measurement, means suppose I have created that so-called thinnest slicing of my user story and created, but its validation can only be happened when it goes to say production or a UAT where my user
Very
will
good question.
test it.
Very
Correct?
good question. Yeah, this slide, I'm talking about that only. What you
Okay.
were saying.
Okay. Okay. Then you please go ahead. Then sorry if I ask a little forward question.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
So the third was outcome that we talked about. Like, it's very important to report on those outcomes. Do not report the red, green, and yellow status of your project. If you're doing it, find out a way to get rid of it and replace that with your outcomes. And in order to replace with the outcomes, you have to go whole 9 yards and start creating your features and stories in such a way that you can actually report outcome. So it's again not easy that you go and start reporting outcome on anything if you have just a story like create an API. How will you report outcome in an API? You can't, right? So you have to have those kind of stories and features so that you can report those outcomes. And so that is going to fix the first that problem, like write your stories and features in a right way, then only you can report. But if people are doing it, metrics is the way that you can show that whatever we are measuring or not measuring, why we are, right now I've seen in the company that they're not measuring anything. First thing I'll go and tell the executives, actually I did, is why we are not measuring anything. It's not important for us. We don't want to improve. We don't want to achieve a goal. If we do not have a metrics, guaranteed they will not achieve the goal on time. They cannot improve. They'll just talk about the continuous improvement. They will talk about progress over perfection, but there won't be any progress, or whatever progress they make doesn't make sense. So you have to have that outcome orientation or your goal orientation. And then the next point, which Manish was just talking about, is like, it's not only important to talk about the development in silos. A lot of companies, they have components. They're developing one component. Somebody is developing API, somebody is developing UI, somebody is developing, or even if you're developing the application, you have a vertical slice. Say a vertical slice can have multiple things. For example, when I was in Starbucks, they had like creating a profile, especially if you want to order coffee over the phone. You have to create a profile. You have to integrate the payment system. Then you should have the ability to go and look up the product catalog that you want to order. Then you will get a start. All these things are like disjointed system. But for a customer, it doesn't matter, right? For customer, it's a journey. When they go and buy the coffee, they should be able to profile, they should be able to go and order coffee, and they should be able to get a start. Behind the scene, when you're working, there are so many different systems. So that's why I recommend this approach of the customer journey or end-to-end workflow. Or a lot of people say the value stream mapping. Value stream mapping, the reason I personally do not like is because they just go and try to map that system, the existing system. The idea should not be just to go and remain confined to the existing system. The idea should be to go and find the quickest and the fastest way of reaching value to the customer, even if that means changing the value system that is existing in your company. So that's why I always recommend customer journey approach or end-to-end workflow. And why this is important, how do we report on this customer journey? This is also very important. So one of the principles that we have to keep in mind when you're working on a customer journey approach, you have to work end-to-end as much as possible. So if your customer journey is too long, break it down to mini journey. And the mini journey is not going to be the halfway. The mini journey is going to be what is that the minimum amount of things that we can do, and we can still reach customer, if not for viable options, like in this case, ordering coffee, ordering food, ordering whatever it is, getting loan, but at least getting their feedback, right? Through some customers, maybe the captive customers, local, the customers inside the company, or maybe if nobody, then your product owner, your business, that you have to get a feedback. So for that, you should always work in the breadth first, not depth. So if you're not working in the depth, you're working on the breadth, there need to be some metrics, like how often we integrate. For example, there is one team who is working on the profile, second is working on the payment, and third is working on the stars, fourth is working on reviews and something else. It should not happen that you go and create your entire profile first, you create your entire payment system first, you create entire shipping first, and then you create your entire review system first. No. Try to go and see how often to integrate across the systems. There must be metrics on that. And this is very important. If you do not have metrics in how often integrate, what happens in most of the companies, they keep creating system, and when they integrate towards the end. And guess what happens? By the time, and I've seen live, I won't give examples of those companies, but I have seen live, like when they try to integrate, they realize, oh, the API is missing all these data fields. Oh, the UI has been written assuming this. Now they have to change 80% of the UI, 70% of the API, basically restarting the development. And this happens because they integrate late. So you must integrate across the system throughout the journey, even if that's mini journey, and throughout the mini journey, that a small end-to-end workflow as many times as possible. If your data shows that you integrate once in 6 months or once in a year, then you understand that you are in for a big trouble, right? This is not going to work. This is not something that you can demo. In safe world, they call it system demo. You cannot demo a system, or for that matter, you cannot have end-to-end demo in that world, right? How often we deliver capabilities or outcomes, and that goes to the second point. That is very much. So first is integration, the second is outcome. Okay, now you have integrated. Are you really delivering an outcome, right? An outcome means not necessarily like full-blown viable product, but also something that you can go and show to your customers. How often do you demo to the customer? And demo, when I'm saying, is not just going and showing the code. Demoing means going and delivering something and demoing something that they can use, the customers can use, either to give you feedback or to go and accomplish some tasks or generate some value. For example, if you've just written on the T on your page and you're showing to the customer says looks good, that's a value. So, and the customer able to go and actually order something, even no matter just one product, that's a huge value. So those kind of value I'm talking about, they should be able to go and provide some feedback, or they should be able to generate some value, create some value. The third is how often we incorporate customer input. There's another data often missing. People listen to the customer and then ignore it. I remember in the previous company I was working on, I connected them with the customer. The customer came and they gave lots of feedback. So I asked them, like, how many feedback did you get? They went and looked into the detail and said, like, 149. I said, like, how many of them were implemented? Are they important? Number one. They said, yeah, they're important. Were they implemented? No, we'll talk about that later. No, it's very important. As you get the feedback, you should implement those feedback as quickly as possible, because they're your customer. You just cannot say, if it's not important, then don't implement it. Just get out of it, get rid of it. But if it is important, incorporate that in your development ASAP. Listen to the customer. Customer is the most important thing for which you're developing this product. And the last here is average time reduction in delivering a product increment. So this is also very interesting metrics that, since we do not develop that way, we do not produce, we do not have this metrics. For example, create an MVP. The MVP here is like it's going to take a year. That's not an MVP. That's your entire product. MVP is something that you can go and reach the customer in the fastest possible way and then see is whether it has any value or not. And that MVP may differ from product to product, but still you need to have some data. Is like for delivering something viable, not valuable. The valuable is when you just show the T to the customer, like on the page, that's valuable, right? Viable is when customer is actually using your product. So from one MVP to the next set of MVP, MVP is not one, there could be many cuts of MVP, the first MVP, second MVP, third MVP, fourth MVP. So when you're delivering those MVP, you can go and start seeing that how long does it take to actually deliver your MVP end to end. The longer it is, red flag. The shorter it is, good. But like I said, it also depends on your features. It also depends on your product and so many other factors. But it's still, at least you know, like this particular feature took me 2 months to deliver an MVP, or maybe just 15 days to deliver an MVP. So if you start having those data, then you will get a very good insight into how long does it take to actually give something viable to the customer, not just valuable. Okay, I'll pause for a minute. So Manish, did it answer your question that how we actually go and report on those outcomes or end-to-end workflows?
Not up to the full extent. Means the kind of thing what I am looking for here is, I was just talking about, that validation can only happen when customer looks into it. So
Correct.
are you suggesting that we need to have a fast integrated cycle and implement these changes or whatever suggestion from
Yes, yes,
customer to that?
yes,
I was
yes.
asking, is there any way in terms of metrics, can I make a quality, how good I have written my user story? Is that
Okay.
something too much to ask for?
No, so that question I asked, like how good is your quality? How it's kind of that will be very subjective. You say like how good is your story, but you
Mhm.
can make it more like a objective is like does it meet the invest criteria? You know, all the stories that you can have as part of when I was talking about the systemic thing, when you can have overall quality index, and in the index you can have a question how many stories that we worked on actually met the invest criteria. That becomes very, you know, it's not subjective, it becomes very objective. Then you can go and see does it meet or not, and you can start reporting on those. When you start reporting those kind of a thing, then it becomes very apparent, okay, so in how we define quality, not just by the number of defects, but
Hmm.
how many stories were actually ready when we took in the iteration? How many stories actually met the invest criteria? How many stories were developed together versus was handed off? You can have those kind of questions and metrics around that. as part of that GQM, which I talked about earlier in the second slide, as not second slide, the second point in this slide, like overall quality, and you need to go and work collaboratively and set that up that we are going to go and measure this and then give this. If you do that, obviously there's going to be improvement because people are not going to go and see the bad numbers there, over and over again.
So you mean to say around definition of ready and definition of done, if we can become more and more stringent, that will be more valuable for us and outcome basis.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And you should always expose that with the data. Like
Yeah.
the data is like how many stories met the invest criteria, how many stories were actually uh, developed collaboratively versus somebody came from somewhere and threw you on the team like go and work on it without being collaborative on that. So you can have those kind of, and like I said, it all depends on the team, and you have to spend a good amount of time in order to create that matrix and expose with everybody's consensus like, hey, we are exposing that means we'll have to work accordingly and just see the changes, because the moment that data start coming out, the people will start fretting, oh my god, I'm going to be seen very negatively in this or positively. And if you start producing those data, right now the data is hidden, nobody cares, so you can do whatever you like, right? So metrics is the way of exposing those dysfunctions.
I think I also want, sorry, I'm Samrat. So I also wanted to add something on that. So I have a kind of different take. So I don't think that the agile requirements are required to be a pure requirements, because the whole story of having the 3C concept of the card conversation and the confirmation is all about your requirements should be ambiguous requirements, so that you will go and have the conversations and then
Yes,
you will go and have the confirmations, right? So,
yes,
and the invest criteria itself is we cannot have the stories in advance which follows the invest criteria. It
yes.
is the development team or the scrum team which is going to actually make the refinements in a manner that we are going to have the stories eventually following the invest criteria. Right. So it cannot be a kind of there is a kind of a stage gate that okay, if these stories are not meeting the invest criteria, they are not ready for the development. That cannot be the agile requirements.
That's a very good point actually. So what you're talking about is it should not be a stage gate, and at any stage, if you thought that I'm talking about the stage gate, that was not the intention. What I was talking about is collaborative development, right? All the time. So once the story enters the sprint, you cannot say like, sorry, it did not meet the invest criteria, but we are still going to work on it, right? So when you're producing the matrix, only after the card collaboration conversation and everything happens, and you have already groomed the story, already refined the story, and then you're ready to take it, then you can have those metrics. It does not preclude that only when you met the criteria it is ready to be discussed by the team. I did not say that. What I'm saying is like the team should always be working collaboratively right from the beginning, whether it starts at the feature level at the epic level. You cannot just say like, hey, go and meet this criteria and then hand it off to us. That is wrong, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying just the
Yeah. Yeah.
opposite. You should always work in an overlapping fashion. The moment there is a handoff, I'm not saying that there should be metrics on the handoffs. No. What I'm saying is the team should always be working together until it is delivered to the customer, right? So what it means is this criteria, whether it has met the invest or not, can only happen once you do your sprint planning, the story is accepted. The story is accepted and still you have not met the invest criteria, you should have a report on that. Like why, despite all the card and conversation and everything that we had and all the collaborative work we had right from the beginning since the epic, why it did not meet the invest criteria. That's the idea. Make sense?
One thing actually I just want to add is that sometimes these the metric which we are talking about, like whether the story itself is very well defined or whatever, that those becomes the target actually. Those becomes the goal instead of the end goal or the outcomes which we are looking for. So as we are, instead of that, as we start chasing the customer satisfaction, and we find that in order to satisfy the customers, satisfy the customer, we are finding that there are problems in the story creations, for example. Then you start seeing like what you can fix around them. For example, let's say that if there is enough collaboration in the team, so the product owner is sitting next to you, then you will, based on the collaboration and conversation, you will be able to find out that what exactly needs to be done. But in case that product owner is sitting somewhere else in US, for example, and there is a 12 hours of difference, then it will be having a problem in terms of your readiness of your story actually. So I think as you just mentioning around the product quality, about the metrics which really should matter, customer centricity, I think those should be the target, and these rest of the things should be kind of enabler, but should not be the real goals which where we are trying to go. So as we start focusing only on those metrics, like it's to those internal metrics, then it feels like we are doing good, but then outcome may not be the satisfactory actually.
So another important point which I'm going to highlight here is, and going back to the previous discussion that was having, is why do we have that kind of a stage gate problem? If you look into detail, you realize that if you hand off solutions and not the business need exactly in a story format and a feature format, then the problem of solution, because somebody has already worked on a solution for you high level and all they ask you to just go and deliver it, then there is no question of card and conversations, because it's a solution and all you have to do is to code. The whole idea behind the story is you understand the business need, you create a solution, you create your hypothesis, you create multiple solutions, and then you figure it out as a team of engineers, like what is the best approach as a team, what we think is the best solution for this problem. Versus you are already given a problem. When you're already given a problem, then whatever you do does not make sense, because after that, the quality of your story has already been determined by somebody else, right? And they say like, and I've seen a lot of people say like, hey, we have met our definition of ready at the feature level. No, that's not how it's determined. Like somebody else decides, like this is the definition of ready. The definition of ready is always determined collaboratively by everybody working on the story, right from the business to the developers. And they all have to agree that yes, it meets. And in that process, the card happens, in that process, conversation happens. And when you elaborate, when you ask questions, when you come up with solutions together, and then you go and say like, okay, now I'm ready, and now I'm ready to go and take it within the iteration after doing all the work. Then you say like, now it entered the iteration, what percent of the stories were actually the stories, and what percent of the stories were not actually stories, we just took tasks. We need to report on that. That's what I was talking about. Did I answer your question? Samrat, right?
Yeah, of course it answers. I don't think that it was a kind of question from my side. I just wanted to since we were talking about having a kind of pure requirement, so I thought that the requirements, if it is pure, then it is actually forcing us not to have further discussions, right? So, and the
Exactly.
whole idea of this agile requirement is that it should be ambiguous, so that you go and confirm it, you go and have the conversations around it, so to
Yep.
bring
Yep.
both the dev and the PO on the same page.
Correct, correct, exactly. And it doesn't have to be ambiguous, it has to be high level so that you understand and you start developing solutions on that. When the requirement becomes a solution, that's exactly what happens in most of the companies. They don't give you a requirement, they give you actually solutions, right? When they give you solutions, then what happens? There is no room for slicing it, breaking it, making it better conversations. You basically rob them off, you make them an order taker. That's what you have to avoid. And that's where the stage gate starts coming in. Like we give you that, basically the solution. Somebody sitting up there is deciding that what API you have to write, and they'll ask you to go and just write this API versus telling the business problem, right? Yeah. So anyway, so that was the idea behind it. And now let's move on to the next one. And this is pretty standard that you have seen in the productivity metrics is sprint burn down. And the reason I mentioned the sprint burn down only is very important because this also talks about that how we develop. It changes our behavior. And a lot of people don't like it, especially if you're working in the iteration, because what happens is typically your iterations, I'll show you one picture. How does it look like? Uh, this looks like this. Most of the iterations, if we go and say it, you keep working, and the final day of the iteration or day before you start closing all the stories. And sometimes it keeps going on and on, it never closes. Sometimes you are getting closer, but it's still far off. Sometimes you try to go and finish way too early here, all those things. And this is considered ideal. And there's nothing wrong with this. The only, the reason I recommend this here, this kind of it, burn down, is this forces you to close early. Just because you have a one pointer story, it doesn't mean you have a 15 days to go and finish that story in 15 days or 2 weeks or whatever the time frame is. If you get a story, you need to swarm with as many people and try to deliver that in production as early as possible. Not like wait until the end of the iteration. That is not something. I mean, people have some myth that say you take 4 stories with one goal, right? And your first story is ready, and you can even deploy the story in production. You don't have to wait 2 weeks. Go and start keep deploying it. This is a 2-week time frame. That's the maximum amount of time that was given to you to deliver that. Does not mean you have to take 2 weeks. And if you have a smaller stories and a high priority story, or for that matter, something that you can finish in a day or two, working together collaboratively, swarming on those, then go and finish it off and start delivering it in production as early as possible. You don't have to wait until 2 weeks. And this kind of a burn down that will show that you are actually working and finishing it, finishing it, versus you're working on everything and finishing towards the end. This basically exposes the internal dynamics, that are you swarming, are you working one at a time, or you're working on everything at a time, those kind of things. It exposes very nicely. That's why I'm a big fan of this burn down. And the second here is the release. The release burn down also talks about especially when you have a date driven delivery, that this is the date and these are our 10 goals, how far we are, how much we are behind. And then you can see we are achieving the goal or we are not achieving the goal in that designated time frame. Even otherwise, even if you don't have goals, even if you don't have a release date, you can still see that how you are progressing goal after goal, so that you can see we're achieving or not. Like one of the example earlier given, where it says we have to have a release by this period of time, and they didn't even have a requirement, then this release burn down would very nicely expose we have made zero progress or very little progress. And that will help people understand what actually. So release should not happen towards the end. There should be as many releases as possible that should happen. Small releases. That's the whole beauty of agility, is trying to make things smaller. And those small things in a small increments you can show in your release burn down, how much you're releasing in production as we go on. If your release burn down shows zero, no progress, you can understand how well you're doing, right? Not a good idea.
One thing actually just want to focus also is that many times can you just show the burn down, actually sprint burn down? So here actually the third burn down you see on the right hand side corner actually. So generally people may be asking that at the end of the day we are releasing or we are finishing the sprint at the end of the week or 2 weeks. Then what is the point actually to finish it early or whatever? So generally what I've seen is that you should be, instead of able to demoing or the number of stories or a increment towards the end of the sprint, the team should be able to able to release it multiple times in a sprint actually. And
Yes.
generally, this kind of problem where you see that like this burn down is generally happens because the that kind of capability may not be there, so there is not much focus on the engineering capabilities, and that's why they try to combine multiple a batch of the stories together and then try to release it, or may not be releasing it after 2 3 sprints actually. So as you start focusing on creating the capability to doing the continuous deployment or continuous delivery, then, and which is not really rocket science these days. I mean, lots of organizations are doing these days. As you do that, then you will be able to deliver even a single story, or you should be able to deliver multiple times in a story as well. So when I say multiple times in a story, that is basically the idea to reduce the risk in the production. So people try to see what are the kind of risk for that story, and then accordingly to try to add those increments in the production as well. So just wanted to add that.
No,
Well,
that's a great point.
very good. So I agree to it. But however, I also wanted to add something on this third sprint burn down. It is even talking about something which we are probably missing is at times what happens that your story was a very big story. It was a 8 pointer, and all of a sudden that becomes complete, and there is a kind of sudden fall, right? So it is even giving us a kind of indication that we are not probably slicing the stories into a very smaller chunks, and we are not able to target them in a proper manner, right? So that could also, if that's a kind of very intentional one, so that can also be one of the reason of
Yep,
falling
yep,
this way.
yep,
Only thing
exactly.
I was just adding is that I mean, the problem is that we don't see the incentive. Like, why should we even close it early? So let's say that there is an incentive that as soon as you're done, you should be able to move to the production. You should be able to move, show it to the customer, and he can provide the feedback. In case that doesn't happen, in case the deployment itself is become a kind of big bottleneck in your system, then I mean, there may be 8 pointer, there may be 3 pointers as well. So all those basically may have this kind of curve.
Exactly, exactly. So I give you an example of there's a company called you must have heard of the Target. It's a grocery store basically. It's a chain, and they run dojos. You heard of dojos? No. Dojos is basically a very intense cycle of coaching where you actually work on the real backlog in a very short iterations. So typically you run 2 week iteration. When you go to dojo, they'll make you run 2.5 day iterations. So basically, in 2.5 day, you have to slice the story so small. So if you have an 8 pointer, you'll have to break it down into kind of a 3 pointer or something, so that you can finish in 2.5 days. So that's the idea behind it: is learn to work a small. And once you learn to a small that finish a story in 2.5 day, then you will have this kind of a burn down, because now you understand. So when they go back from 2 week, a lot of them reduce their sprint length to 1 week, but that's not the idea. The sprint length depends on the business need, but still the idea is learn how to work a small and finish the story in the shortest possible time by breaking it, by working collaboratively. So what they do actually is reduce the length of the sprint to 2.5 days. Then you know that in 2.5 days you have to do the planning, retrospective, review, demo, and develop the story, everything together. So your story has to be really, really small. So that's how they enforce it. So that's one way of saying is like, even if you have a 2 week iterations, you should work as if you have 2.5 day iteration. Like every 2.5 day you're finishing something, you know, mental. Just mentally you keep in mind like, hey, I don't have 2 weeks, I only have 2.5 days, and I have to finish my first story together as a team, second, third, fourth, and then keep moving accordingly. So when you do that, then you will have this kind of a burn down. Okay. In the interest of time, moving quickly over to quickly back to this velocity committed versus completed. This is one of my favorites, so that you can estimate as how much you actually committed and how much you completed. Deployment frequency. This is the one thing that we just talked about. That how often we deploy. within an iteration. If you're deploying 3 or 4 times an iteration, means your stories are small enough, good enough, you meet the definition we've done very fast, you run all your automation tests and everything on those stories to make sure that it is production ready so that you can deploy it. So those are the beauty. Like if you start reporting on the deployment frequency, if your deployment frequency shows like you are deploying once in 3 months, then you can imagine it's something you're working on is big, and that should be reduced to small and smaller. And finally, the one thing, another favorite is radar chart. That this is again shows all the competencies you have in the team, and you can show that as you progress, how your overall team is doing in terms of stories, in terms of the delivery defects, in terms of the contributions, in terms of the collaboration, in terms of all those things. You can have multiple competencies, and you can show the overall team growth, the health of a team in terms of on the radar chart, like how the team is doing. And you can do this periodically, maybe every 3 months, and see whether the team is improving in certain competencies or not. So you can map those competencies and you can see the results. So that's the beauty of that radar chart. So let me quickly go over to the next 2 slides, and then I will open for the questions. The other is the team health metrics, and this is very important that we need to talk about the team morale. And team morale is different from team happiness, or so morale is more like, do you really enjoy the work? Do you really like to do the work that you're doing? Enjoy the work means like not just the kind of work, means the kind of software that you're working on, but also are you basically enjoying the work in the sense like, do you like working collaboratively? Are you working? Do you enjoy working small? Do you enjoy going to the customer faster and seeing the results of your work? You know, everything that comes under that is called enjoyment of work. So if you do not enjoy the work, then there is something wrong. Then we need to go and fix it, because then you'll get bored, you will get dissatisfied, and then you won't be productive. And if you're not productive, obviously that's not something that is. The Agile is about the people, like, and their interest, their enjoyment. If making work like a fun, if you're not making your work a fun, then you won't be passionate about it. The second is working in a company. Since you're working in the company, have you improved? Have you gained the skills? And another beauty of agility is there's so much of emphasis towards mastery, towards learning the other skills, you know, T-shaped skills, learning other skills, cross-functional teams working together and working in a collaborative way, working together to develop, having those open conversations. It definitely helps improve not just your hard skills, but also your soft skills. Soft skills means how to deal with your, fellow colleagues, how to deal with the management, how to deal with variety of people, and how to deal with your customer. How not just in the soft, but also in the hard skills, like have you learned the new skills? If you're a back-end developer, have you learned the front-end development at least a little bit? If you're working on this technology, have you become a resident SME expert on certain areas? So there's so much opportunity of growth that's the next thing that you should look for. Like while you're in the company, when you join, and since that day, and while you're today, is that you're gaining something new? Are you learning something? Keep in mind, Agile is all about learning. Learn fast. I won't say fail fast, learn fast. Like if you delivered something, it failed. Did you learn something that how you should have done differently? So long as you keep learning, not just on the product, but also all other sides, the soft skills, hard skills, you're growing. And you will have growth mindset. So that's the idea behind it. And that we should somehow the other capture in metrics. Do you see the clear results of your work? Right? And this is another thing which I have been talking about, the outcome orientation. You should have a clear goal and you should see the results. If you're not seeing the results and your results are coming like so one of the things that I did when I was in Capital One, though, when my VP asked me to go and deliver something faster, first thing that I asked was this, like have a monthly goal and show us the results. If you do not show us the results, the people won't be motivated to give you a small delivery. When you show us the results, so what they did when they broke down into goals, after the first delivery in the first month, which basically plug all that the people were gaming the system, so they plug the hole. The company saved millions of dollars, and they shared that data with the team. Like, hey, your effort in a month helped the company save millions of dollars, and you can just imagine how big a motivator that was. So that kind of a results that you need to share, and even if the result is negative, still you should share so that you know that we are honest, we honor transparency, and that we are going and sharing the results. Like effort did not bring the result that we're expecting, means we need to pivot or do something different. How much is full potential explored? The people have all kinds of potentials, right? And if your full potential is not explored, then what happens? Then you know that you're one of the biggest motivator, that is mastery, is being compromised. Means you are not able to deliver your best because there is no atmosphere, there is no environment to deliver the best. So this is also something that must be captured somehow. Like, is it helping you realize the full potential? And are you enthusiastic about your future work? So the future work that is coming, is it going to be more like a maintenance and compliance work, or it's like a new feature, new exciting work, working on the new technology, blockchain, machine learning, and all those things, where this is going to go and improve your skill and you're excited to learn new things? These things somehow the other must be captured either through the survey that I talked about, the radar chart, or through some metrics. But these are extremely important for keeping the team health high. I mean, high on that index. Team health index is very important. And the second is the team improvement and learnings, which I talked about a little earlier, like behavioral change. Did you learn some soft skills? How to collaborate, how to negotiate, how to go and agree, how to agree to disagree, how to work together. This is very important. From UT to TDD, if you're doing unit test, and have you started doing TDD, behavior driven development, those kind of a thing, the new skills, the new learnings. Shotgun surgery to discipline refactoring, just fixing something on the fly, to leading the refactoring in a disciplined way, means we are making refactoring a habit versus just going and fixing something on the fly, right? When we see the issue, so you are proactively going and solving issues versus waiting till the end. Like, well, the issue happens, that you're going to go and fix it. No, you should own your code and keep it at the highest possible reliability, quality, maintainability, and that's where you need the discipline refactoring. Prescriptive spec that one of you guys talked about, like, it should not be a specification, it should not be a requirement, well defined. To design changes as we learn, so that you go, and you should not have like, hey, we are just getting the solutions. Instead of that, we are basically getting the opportunity to go and provide you the solution. We are doing the changes as we learn more. Means it's not a full block of a code, just go and deliver. It's something that we're learning, and we are integrating our learning into our development and then delivering. So that should be the thing. And if you have not incorporated learning into your development, basically what you're doing is more like a monolithic work. Go and just hand off whatever the solution you're given, carry out the orders. That's not the idea behind that. So we need to have metrics around that as well. And heavy reliance on end-to-end test to fewer end-to-end test. So you'll see in a lot of companies, most of the bugs are being found in the end-to-end test. Actually, the end-to-end test must be hardly 5%. It should not be majority of your test. Most of your test, 80% of your test must be unit or mutation test. Then next 15 functional test or integration test. And then finally, only 5% should be end-to-end test. In a lot of companies, the end-to-end test is a whole amount of the testing. All the testing happens there. And the unit testings and the function testings are kind of taking the back seat. So that kind of flip. So all these kind of, this is just an example, and that's not it. There are a lot of other things that we can include in improvement and learning, and those should be included, and we need to have a metrics around that, like how we are learning. Like I said, either through that radar chart or through some survey or some other means, or through that GQM technique that we need to have we improved our learning? And then you can ask those questions like, was there any perceptible behavior change? And you can form questions around that. Have we moved from UT to TDD? what percentage of TDD we are doing, what percentage of teams are doing TDD, or what percentage of stories are being done that way. Are we doing discipline refactoring? How much refactoring we are doing? How much technical debt we have reduced? How much we have learned how much learning we have incorporated into our design, or we're just delivering like an order taker solution. So all those metrics you can deliver, and then you can see like you're high in that index or low. So that way your team health will always be high along with the agile software development. Okay, so with